having floods even. So a few weeks back, with about 3 or 4 hours of rain, large parts of Cochin was flooding. With just a matter of 3 or 4 hours of rain, and so offices were were in standstill. Business was on a standstill. And this happens, though there were the large 2018 and 2019 floods, almost every time it rains, Trivandrum, near the railway station, Thrissur, Cochin, Calicut, we have places flooding. So these are recurring issues. So there's a wide variety of issues related to the construction industry, and most or a lot of them relate to our excessive extraction of the environment, to use one of the speaker's words. And I think Suhasini brought the discussion very well to the end by asking, why is it that this keeps happening, and what are we doing about it, and what more can we do about it? So at first, if there's any questions from the audience, you're welcome to speak up and share any thoughts. But while you're thinking, I'll just like to throw that question that Suhasini asked to Professor Katie, in terms of your thoughts on why is it that there isn't much change happening. And is it something, you've worked with the government in many places across the country. So why is it that there's a lot of protests, there's a lot of noise, and then after a while we've forgotten what's happening and there's not much progress? Or is there progress?
I think the fact that we are having a conversation is a sign of progress, but that's not progress enough. So like that, there are many conversations happening, but that still is not enough. Because the real change has not happened. And I think the real changes actually implies quite a few political questions related to land and its use. How tough a position is our government willing to be taking? That, I think, is the question. Because unless there is a legal sanction to any public policy, which can only come by governmental authentication, I think no change, no lasting changes can happen from one perspective. On the other side, if people themselves don't realize, they think it is just a problem that they can get over, that's a second problem. In other words, it takes two hands to clap, and both hands are reluctant to come together. So that means some very tough decisions on the side of the government and some tough decisions on the side of the people. If you have been living in a floodplain, you will have to change are you willing to be relocated? If you are not willing to be relocated, should the government aid you in the next flood or not? If you are adamant you don't want to leave the place, there's going to be more floods. That's for certain. It's not going away like that. In which case, will those people who refuse to move still receive public help, or should they not receive public help? Those are all tough decisions that need to be taken by government or whoever is dispersing the funds. So one of the things that's happened is that instead of disintegrating the society, the flood has brought people together. Because a common calamity and the manner in which the people and the non-governmental agencies, the outsiders, the insiders, everyone came together in the state of crisis, and that was, I think, was an exemplary thing. Similar thing happened in the Chennai floods also. People really were heroic in the way they responded to it. But then next day it's business as usual. So problem is that when people are capable of coming together, why are they coming together only when there's a crisis? Why aren't they coming together when there's no crisis? At least those of us who are professional people who recognize that there is a continuing crisis, that is just a tinderbox waiting to go off, why are we not acting? It's a question which Suhasini raised, and I think that's a very relevant question. And that needs to be answered by the people in this room.
So I think the people in the answering as to why is it, what is it that's stopping you from engaging? Is it lack of awareness? Is it loss of hope? Anybody who wants to just speak up? This question: why is it that change is not happening? Why is it that none of us are able to?
Basically, I'm not an architect, so I won't be able to speak from an architect's point of view. But since most of your architects, I think if you are an architect, one of your dreams would be to build a structure like Burj Khalifa, something big and something that is, modern, things like that. So one of the reasons lies there, like we as a society is built on a system which looks for extravaganza or what we call pompness. That's evident from the location that we have chosen to conduct such an event. This particular hall, the building, everything is kind of what you call modern or which uses lots of energy and resources. So that's basically what we as a human being or as people are tend to do. I think that is built in the monetary system that we are in the basic culture or the system that is built on is going in that direction. That's what I personally feel, because we want more stuff, more facilities, more comforts, and that eventually will lead to more consumerisms and more stuffs that we buy, that we keep in our homes. So, like many of the speakers here said, I think we need to travel back into minimalism and possessing more lesser and lesser stuffs in our life, and kind of going back to equilibrium, wherein things can move backwards. I think the youth in this hall can take a step in that direction rather than going for big architectural structures. Think about how we can reduce that footprint on the economy, on the environment. I think that's one way forward, and the youth can take a lead on that.
Would anybody else maybe?
I think first of all, I'd like to congratulate Abid for bringing this five great speakers together. It's a very rare group to come together, I guess. And other than that, as architects, as we talk, I feel now, as Suhasini was saying, how many of us as architects would refuse a 10,000 square feet house when it comes to us as projects? Or a 15,000 square feet house? I think maybe less than 1%, or even less than that. We all are happy to get big projects, to build huge things. There are huge rounds of things which goes on in the, Facebook or WhatsApp. It's the largest house in Kerala, some 70,000 square feet, and people are all happy sharing it. So that is something which we are promoting as a society. Are we promoting minimalism? I doubt. Personally, I really doubt. And again, we are promoting, like when floods happens, the first thing, I'm not criticizing government, but what happens is, okay, they collect a lot of money. Okay, I don't know, they said some Kerala government managed to collect some 3,000 crore or some big amount as a relief for floods. But I don't think money is the solution for everything. And then consultants come from somewhere, discussions happen. As Sir Sandeep sir was saying, there could be local, simple solutions where we have gone wrong. Now, I think Abid was saying about flooding in Kochi. It's basic, simple things. They have blocked all the drains, all the water channels in Cochin. Builders have done it, malls have done it, but we can't talk loudly about that. And finally Kochi gets flooded. If you come to Thrissur, just out, it had a beautiful water management system. Things was raised, and then within 5 minutes, all the water. But now most of the paddy fields are built or are housing colonies, which happened in the last 30 years. So now that we have spoiled that water management system, so now we are thinking of expensive solutions. We are bringing in multinationals or consultants to solve our own issues. I think it's basic, simple. As architects, we have created a lot of these things, and as he was saying, it's all a multi-chain products. Everything. We are all in a loop. So I'm not very sure if we can get out of that loop. If we can, possibly we are saved.
Yes, for the sake of the videography, it will be nice if you can stand up, but I'm not insisting. If you can stand up, introduce yourself before you speak, that would be helpful.
I am Jafar Ali, based at Calicut, architect. Actually, it's a good program with very eminent scholars. First of all, I want to say this against about the sustainable development. Actually, it should be a sustainable living. Instead of what you can do, we should be discuss what we can do or I can do. Then only we can achieve the goal of sustainable development. And also, so far we were discussing about some of the adaptation points of the climate change or flood or some kind of natural calamities. But we didn't discuss about the mitigation points. Actually, all these were happened because of the climate change. Climate change is happened not because of the activities of the third world countries or the developing countries like us, India or such, but it is happened because of the developed countries, the activities of developed countries, the emissions of carbon, greenhouse gases, and also a lot of studies are there and the research papers are there. The global warming is because of this climate, the global warming is because of this greenhouse gas emissions. So, what are the international treaties or agendas for bringing down these carbon emissions or the greenhouse gases? That whether that goal is being achieved or not, that is one of my questions to the scholars, and also that. In our life, also our life, even in the building, as engineers or architects, or as a layman, or in any field, everyone can look to any kind of development, whether my development is increasing the carbon footprint or the carbon emissions. Such kind of self-evaluation is necessary for achieving the sustainable development. In Kerala, it is, of course, our economy is from major part of the economy is from the Gulf countries. But what happening is our social or economical sustainability also vanishing, because in Kerala the major part of the money transaction is the building sector. So we are the RB architects or engineers doing the designs and big buildings with a lot of material quantities. Then also what happening is finally most of our architects or engineers, they are draining this money into China or some other foreign countries, because all the imported materials are being used in the buildings and all. So same way our economic sustainability is also being lost. So this is also one point that we get cleared from our scholars. Thank you.
Would any of the panelists like to respond on international treaties?
Yeah, there have been several international treaties, conferences. I can keep going on, starting with UN Man and Environment Summit in Stockholm in 1972 to Rio Summit in 1992 to Kyoto Protocol to Montreal Protocol to Copenhagen, and it goes on and on and on. And we discuss the same things. We sign treaties. We come back and we go again meet after 5 years, and we say, oh, we haven't met our targets, so let's realign our targets. You know, the thing is that it's all tied to the economic thing. Nobody is willing to cut down their environmental, nobody wants to cut down the economic activities, and also because they always feel that if you if you give focus on environment and try to save the planet, your economic well-being will go down. That's something that has always been going on. And in all these high-level treaties, mostly high-level conferences, mostly the blame is trying to shift from developed countries to developing countries to developed countries. It goes back and forth. And in the end, we all suffer. You know, it's something that is going on. And I think the next summit is going to be in Cancun or someplace, and you know, it goes on and on. So I think that summits will go on, the leaders will make their promises, they'll sign their treaties, but we have to continue doing what we can do at our level, you know. And I would not say that go down to the level of just fooling yourself that saving a water bottle or, you know, not buying a plastic chappal will actually do the thing. But there is a larger evil out there, which is the corporations which are doing this. You know, whenever there's a problem, they'll say, okay, let's ban the single-use plastic because we are the easy targets. The government can pressurize us to take out the plastic, but they'll never tell Pepsi to do not put their plastic bottles, but use glass bottles. They never do that. You know, they always go after the easy targets, and until people stand up to all these things, I think this is not going to change. And they only stand if you come together and engage with them. I think the corporations are very good at engaging with the government. They know how to get policies passed. You try and get an appointment with the Prime Minister, it's very difficult. Ratan Tata goes, he gets it next day. So, you know, so there's a certain, but you have to build up that people's movement to actually get something to a point where you can actually make a difference. One thing I want to add is that you were talking about a minimalistic lifestyle. Yes, I agree that's really important. But at the same time, we don't forget that it's corporations, and don't leave that fight against them. Because they are going around extracting water from places, they're mining the products they make, the styrofoam, the packaging, everything, it goes on, and that's the biggest evil than actually what you could achieve by saving water or turn the tap off and light off. Of course, you should do that. I'm not saying you should not do that. But don't forget that that's not going to solve the world's problem. We are beyond that. It has to happen at a much more higher level. About the engagement part, I would say that as a group, should actually form a core group, which I've talked to a couple of people outside, is that you should form a core group and actually engage with each district administration where you come from. You have to show them that you are serious about this and you are willing to engage with them, and it's a continued engagement. You also have to do your jobs, so you have to find efficient way of dealing this. One of a very close friend who worked with the government for many years, from outside and then from inside, told me that if you talk to 50 IAS officers, you will get 5 IAS officers who are very sincere. But unless you talk to those 50 IAS officers, you can't get to those 5. And once you get a good insider who's listening to you, he can be your champion and then take your fight further inside. He'll actually tell you how to engage with the government. He'll tell you, okay, file an RTI, okay, file a case, do this. You know, that's something like a champion you need. Government bureaucrats also need help from outside because they are always pressured from the citizens, as well as they have political pressures on them to deal with this. So more the citizens' pressure on them gets stronger, they can then deal with other pressures. I think that is very important to stay engaged with them. District collectors, some of them I've met during tsunami time, very efficient, very amazing officers. Some of them have become now secretaries after 15 years. They're secretary in Chennai. And they still call us for, oh, we have this problem. Can you help us with this? Can you send us a map of this? Can you do this quick analysis and tell us why this is happening? They still tell us that. You know, the real estate lobby is so strong that Mr. Vijay Pingre, who was the IAS officer, executive director of CMDA, he actually took on the contractors' lobby, the way they build roads and drainage channels and all those things. He actually took them very strongly, and he actually took many of them to court after Chennai floods. He was under pressure, transferred on a Friday night, and Monday morning he was made to join as a personal secretary to Suresh Prabhu, who was the railway minister at that time. So that's the kind of pressure that you are trying to fight against. So it's not a small battle. It's not going to get sorted out if you work in a small places. He's a very sincere IAS officer. After 6 years in Delhi, he's now resigned and he's joined a private company, Ernst and Young. So I recently saw that there is another IAS officer in Kerala recently had resigned. So there are dynamic IAS officers. You have to find them, you have to support them, and you have to give them all the support they need. Because if you start a fight with them but leave them alone in the way, they'll be actually in more trouble from other side. So pick your battles. Yeah.
I am Azad, a third year architecture student. So as an answer for what Abid told earlier, like why we are not more focusing about sustainable, we think that as a young but budding architect student, we are not aware about this type of sustainable thinking, or there are no people to earlier we don't have any role models or people or organization like thinking about like this. Or because initially we come to architecture, we also thought about architecture is mainly aesthetics and form making. But only after coming into this field, we are aware about this type of thinking. So it may be lack of awareness for students about this type of thinking. So this type of programs can be increased to more awareness. Also, one doubt I have, I don't know whether it is discussed earlier. It's after come up after the K.T. Ravin's slide about policy making. So when the doubt is that whether the architects association or engineer associations are included in making with the government of bylaw making or something like that. So just the people of government are making, or there is a general discussion between the association of architecture or engineers before just making these laws. Because last day Vivek sir told me, because this type of incident had been happened the past week or something like the past month or.
Katie, sir, before you respond, can I just also ask you, you talked about the importance of the Gram Sabhas and the engagement at a local level.
Yeah.
Can you, I'm myself included, I'm not aware, I've completely forgotten my civics. Last week I asked somebody if they could help me understand the organizational structure within the government. And you talked about the Gram Sabhas. For us, in very simple terms, can you tell us that first level engagement that you talked about? Is what do we do next? If you decide, okay, I want to get involved at a local level. What is the system at the moment, and then how can we get involved?
Well, I think, first of all, I think all of us have to develop a mindset of an activist. Otherwise, there is no environment. It's nobody's baby, but somebody's expertise. Okay? So when it's just someone's expertise, that person will be marketing his expertise and not getting things done on the ground, nor will it transfer to people. So I think first thing is to make that attitudinal change in ourselves, to believe that if you want to change something, you have to change it first yourself. You have to change yourself first. So that I think is the first step. But as far as the Gram Sabhas and the DPCs and all are concerned, there is the 74th Amendment specifies all that structure. Just look up the net and you will get all the information on how it is structured. And there are parallel planning organizational structure also, in which the right to prepare the plan has been transferred to the elected body from the nominated body of the authority. So all the town planning departments are supposed to work under the elected municipality, work under the mayor, and not work in a town planning organization, which is a state level organization. So this has not been fully implemented even in Kerala. To a large extent, in the metropolitan areas, they have turned the metropolitan area authorities into organizations who are preparing the master plans, answerable to the mayor. So there is a responsibility of the elected representative to ensure that the quality of life to the people is delivered in the right measure. Now, I've seen it being played out in different places, but they still have a mechanism called the commissioner, who used to be the commissioner, is now called the secretary of the municipality. And the secretary is appointed by the government, state government, and all the funding is sanctioned through the secretary. In other words, they have kept their lever on the municipality in their own hands. The state has not fully devolved their power. Because unless the ability to control money and decisions regarding money as to which segment it should be spent on is vested with the electoral body, we are not democratizing the development process. Now, the spirit of the 74th Amendment was to actually democratize the development process so that it is vested with an elected representative and not with a nominated government body. So that has not really happened. But at the panchayat level, it's worked quite well in Kerala. I don't know how many of you knew of or remember, some of you may not even have known it, and there used to be something called the People's Planning Project. Does anyone remember it? Yeah, of course. So the People's Planning Project actually was an initiative of one of the earlier left front governments, where they asked every panchayat to prepare their own development plan. Panchayat to develop the development plan using the unemployed youth of that panchayat, mobilizing them to do the surveys, etc., etc. And all the panchayats were given a structure for bringing out that plan. That is, there had to be geography, there had to be welfare, there had to be SC/ST lists, there has to be geography, there has to be heritage areas, there has to be all the different components which go into plan making was specified by the government, and each panchayat was asked to bring out its own plan. And many of them had brought out the plans, and they were like brilliant plans. They were fantastic plans, but then the next government came and they threw it out of the window, and because some other party came into power, so that People's Planning Initiative was just kept aside. Now, when the People's Planning Initiative was in place, the Gram Sabhas used to meet regularly, and the Gram Sabhas also had the powers to make decisions. And all the decisions that are made by various panchayats and Gram Sabhas and municipalities in a district was mediated by the District Planning Committee. There was something called the DPC, that is the District Planning Committee, and that committee was supposed to negotiate the development process, make sure that everyone's interest is looked after, that what action initiated by one panchayat will not block the waterways of another. It became like an appellate forum where they could bring out the issues, interconnected issues within the district, and discuss it and pass it. It was only after the District Planning Committee passed it that the financial allocation would be made by the state government for whatever initiation that need to be done. So there was a structure in place. Now I don't know where that structure is. Yeah. There is also supposed to be something called the Metropolitan Area Development Committee. The word authority is not used anymore after the 74th Amendment. They all become committees. Authority means it is government. Committee means it's elected or nominated by the elected people. So the whole democratization process of development was anchored on the idea of formation of committees, and there was Metropolitan Area Development Committee which would negotiate the entire sub-region of a metropolitan area to decide what are the priorities that one needs to establish in terms of development. So there was a very good structure in Kerala in place, and the government also set up in Trichur the place called Kila, that is Kerala Local Administration Center, which was training people and panchayat people on this. The Kerala government, through the archaeological survey, had also initiated education program for elected representatives from panchayats by inviting people to come and speak to them about what is heritage, what do you protect, how do you find out something is worth protecting, where do you find the funds, where is the expertise. there was a whole series of training program that was done at block level in Kerala at that time. So all these initiatives were going parallelly at that time. But now I don't know where they are, because I'm also not living here, so I don't have the authority to speak about it so fully. So maybe someone else who's got hands-on experience on this can explain this. But all these structures were very unique structures across the country. No other place had anything resembling anything of this. Now, to a large extent, Karnataka had looked at the panchayat governance improvements, and Karnataka had also mobilized some of the things. West Bengal had mobilized quite a bit of it. And interestingly, it is the two Marxist governments who are very centralized parties who were most keenly involved in decentralization. So, because decentralization is like information, it works both ways. You collect information, and people who are giving you the information are beneficiaries of your action, but you also gain control over their markets. So it works both ways. So some logic like that was happening for a centralized party, where they could put their fingers on the actual problems in a panchayat. But the problem arose when there is an opposition party, there's one party in the state government and another party in the panchayat or another party in the local municipality. So, and they don't want, it's like BJP and Aam Aadmi Party in Delhi, they don't want each other to survive. So they keep sabotaging whatever the other is doing. Of course, the center does much more of it than Aap does it back to the center. But similarly, the process was that the state government would subvert the projects which the municipality tries to bring about, because it's ruled by another party and they don't want that party to succeed. So there was all these, but we should all know that development is politics. And if we don't understand politics, and if we think that is a dirty word, I don't think we should be in the business of building cities. Because building cities, building buildings, the construction industry is a political act. You are taking sides with many things. You're taking sides with people, you're taking sides with the environment, you're taking sides with the vested interests, you're taking many sides. You move and you're taking sides. And that is politics. And we should know that we are instruments of that politics. We are not, sorry, you didn't announce your name.
Azad.
Azad. Like Azad had said that, I don't know whether it should be like this or it should be like that. And if you have a political mind, it is very easy to develop a critical thinking about the happenings in your own surroundings. We are playing politics all the time. So you don't need an outsider or a role model or somebody to come and tell you what you have to do. You simply have to open your eyes and ears and develop a critical thinking about what you see around you. And then you already have a political perspective. And that is all what you need to become an environmental activist. I mean, that's not all, but that's the primary step of attitudinal change that has to be brought in. And I think that is the answer to the question that you asked. And I don't know if I answered your question, but I have a question for you. Yeah? Sure.
No, so that's why before that I wanted to, I like to take referendums. Over here, how many people know who your councillor is? Put your hands up. How many of you know who your MLA is? How many of you know who your chief minister is? So you realize what is happening. That the people who are immediately accountable to you, you don't know them. And you know all the big people. You'll know what is happening in Delhi, you'll know what is happening in somewhere else, but you have no control over, or you're not given control how to deal with your own immediate environment. So we started a small thing, and to be useful as professionals, but we have become too much of professionals. We have become less of citizens. You have rights as a citizen in a democracy, and you have responsibilities as a citizen. So if you were to decide that, okay, you're giving 2 days of your month as a professional, as a citizen, to your ward. So you're going to meet your counselor, you're going to offer your services for the ward planning, and go and meet the citizens of your own ward. Find out how much outlay has been allocated to your ward. Where is that money being used? Do you think it can be used better? Do you think that's a good idea, that you can start by actually something that is immediate and within your scope? Instead of worrying about what an international trade committee is trying to decide for you. I had an Ayurvedic doctor who used to say that 60% of my patients come to me because they're worrying about something that is not in their control. I can't treat them. So that's become our state. Why don't you start doing something that's immediately outside your street?
So can I come in here? Just to tie up what Prashant and Katie said, and also the earlier question. So I don't want this to become a bleak conversation about how we are all dying, right? I mean, we know we are dying, but let's slow down the process a little bit. Many of the things about governance that Katie said is absolutely right. The village panchayat or gram panchayat or ward committee are empowered to do the planning. But given the scarcity of resources, and the resources are not just money, there is absolutely no capacity. How would you expect Peliyatharamba Panchayat to have a planner or an architect who is able to draw out a plan, right? So what they then do is to outsource it to the district planning committee or the town planning, which is anyway stressed out. As the state, they probably have 5 architects, 10 planners for the whole state, and they have to make 5,000 of these plans every year. So coming to the Prashant's point of, is there a good story in all this? There are lots of good stories. I know examples where we've been involved in places like Goa, where, like Sandeep said, if you're offering 2 days of your service, don't think of it as pro bono work that you're throwing your life away. Think of it as building up proof of concept. You can work with one village, and planning here does not mean to draw out a plan. It is planning out a strategy. What do you do with the waste that Calicut is dumping on my panchayat? Where should it go? Who should it be responsible for? So this kind of a document building actually doesn't cost you much time or money. But the fact that there is nothing available on a document means that the issue never gets taken forward. And if even 10% of the people in this room choose one panchayat, you probably need to work on it for 2 days to create a legible, concrete document, which the point is not how beautiful the document is and how many problems you're solving. If you're able to replicate that model in 4 or 5 places, it will actually create a prototype for others to follow. And this is not about whether you're getting paid or not paid. I'm not even going there. The same municipalities actually give tons of money to consultants because they don't have local capacity. But if you're able to develop this prototype at the smallest scale, let's worry about global warming later, but let me worry about the solid waste that is on my doorstep on day 1.
Nabil. Sir, if you can introduce yourself.
I am Khaja Sharafuddin, retired town planner. So I was hearing about our department and the role of town planning departments and also some ambiguities whether the earlier process of people's planning program, etc., completing or continuing, etc. So I think I have to proceed with that first. Okay. I just recently retired from Trivandrum District Town Planner, as the regional town planner of Trivandrum. I was in the process of preparation of master plan for Trivandrum Corporation. It is prepared under Amrut scheme, centrally sponsored scheme. The peculiarity of this master plan preparation is in two ways. One, we have adopted modern techniques for the preparation of land use. We procured maps from NRSA, and then that field survey is conducted and attributes are being calculated. All attributes and this field NRSA map are being integrated, and the land use map is prepared from that one. So we can use this map and data for different purposes, for enormous purposes, for different departments can use this. Not only just for completing a master plan, but this can be used for different purposes of various departments for different sectors that I shall come again. First, I want to clarify Professor Katie's apprehension that this master plan is prepared totally in relation with the public participation, totally. In all from the beginning to the completion, people's participation is taken. First, we gave some different questionnaires to the ward members. There are 100 wards in Trivandrum Corporation covering 215 square kilometers of area. All 100 members, councillors were given forms, and the available data and their requirements, everything is collected first. And that is being recorded in our office, and one presentation is generated from this data, and we again send to the people with a special WhatsApps. So 100 WhatsApps were conducted in 100 wards separately, and in each ward we presented the special presentation related to that ward only. So they can vet it, they can clarify it, and they can modify it. So such a modified data is again collected. So, and also the people are asked to own it, because we officials are not taking any data. We are gathering it from the field with the support of public. Most of the WhatsApps were in full strength. Most of the people participated up to 7 o'clock even in some WhatsApps. So we got such a people participation first. Again, we collected field data by going to the different, all building owners, and all land use data is being taken in one way, and social data is collected in another way. For that, we developed a special app, and sample survey was not taken just using the conventional method. We spread the data using Google Earth, and we can analyze it, whether the spreading is in order. Otherwise, the data will be collected from, we cannot obtain the clear idea about the wards. So separate app were prepared for this, and again all these data were put in public domain. Again, people can watch it. They can, in every stage, they can complain, or they can see it in the site. They can submit their suggestions. Like that, in all steps, people's participation is taken, even in proposals. Again, in the last stage, we will prepare the proposed land use map. Again, go to the people in all the 100 wards. That is the method we are going to adopt. So, I think sir is satisfied with that, I think. Still, Kerala model is in work. Another thing that is not related to our, something related to our sustenance. For that, recently building rules have been amended. There are different opinions, even architects have different opinions. My point is, the 4 things are there in the building rule amended recently. One is ECPC standards, energy conservation standards have been introduced, made mandatory for larger buildings. Another, rainwater harvesting has been made mandatory for all buildings. Then afforestation have been requested, made mandatory. Then the pavement, preventing, instead of preventing percolation of water into the earth, have also been introduced in that. Like that, so our town planning department itself is looking into it. Another problem is government support is something different. So we are not able to implement or adopt all ideas for saving the nature. We cannot do it without the support of the government. That is the problem. Thank you.
There are many architects here who have worked with the government in different levels. Thank you, VC.
Hello. I'm Vinod Srek, architect. My firm is called Good Earth. Yeah, in continuation with the discussion, since you are there in front of us, and that's something which the whole discussion is all about. Couple of questions which I really would like to clarify. One is, you said you are a retired officer, right? Yeah, that gives life easier for all of us. And you can be extremely honest in giving us a suggestion where to catch, whom to hold, and where all of the, the right candidates sitting. As far as you mentioned, you said there are 4 very positive amendments for the building rule. And we feel that there are 35 rules which are absolutely killing the entire building scenario of the state. So as a part of that entire organization which actually came up with the amendments, and as Asad was mentioning, whether isn't it the right thing to do when you create this kind of an amendment or coming out with the whole changeover for the building rules, the stakeholders like architects, builders, even the public, they should be part of the entire program. There has to be discussions, debates, and also understanding what all are the deficiencies of the existing rules and why are the changes happening. In one side, we are all talking about becoming the natural materials are getting depleted. The land area which can be built is become almost 18%. That's what some statistics says. One side we have the Western Ghats, then we have the water bodies, and then the rest is paddy fields and Tannir Tadam and all other things. So to contain the manpower, to contain the economic growth of the state is telling us you build vertical, you build dense, townships and things like that. So I guess when we are coming out with a building rule at this stage, especially this particular conference, I guess that should be the focus, or that's what the focus is all about, that what are we supposed to build and how are we supposed to build as well. So now, as you rightly said, these 4 points which you mentioned in your in clarification is highly appreciated, and that should have been there long back. That should have maybe resolved some of the issues. Now, having said that, how do we build with the present rules when you're talking about go vertical sensibly? Vertical doesn't mean that you go recklessly about it. There has to be building rules. None of us are against building rules. There has to be building rules, but then debated, deliberated, discussed at length with all the experts, experiences, and why is it not done? And now having published it in the Gazette, and it is all over us. And when the state is going through a complete recession in various sectors, not only because of the global thing, there is a national calamity, there is a state calamity which has been continuing every year. Now, how do we come over it? I mean, how does this particular building rule amendment help us as a collective body? I'm not talking as you and me. It is about us going together. How do we move forward? How do we, or whom should we show that there is a lot of gap, there is a lot of mismatch, a lot of confusion which is created by this amendment, which all of it came in the midnight as a gazette. Nobody knew about it. There was absolutely no discussion. So, what do you think about it? I mean, what should be the right approach? Where should we go? And second thing is, second part of the same question. As Sandeep was mentioning just now about his, one of the clarifications, dealing with your own political power, whoever is right next to you. I mean, that is KT's advice also, being a politician, being aware of our politics, and having your own judgments for a better tomorrow, better future, better neighborhood, better environment. So, in continuation, both the experts' opinion, we as an IEA Calicut Center try and be together with the immediate political system all the time and build small government schools to library, to toilet blocks, to bus stations, to, we've been trying our level best as a community together. And now, after the second floods in Wayanad district, there is a massive landslide and there were flooding as well. And this particular village is called Puttumala Panchayat. And IAA Calicut have taken up that responsibility of rebuilding that particular village. I mean, the village, we are not rebuilding in the same location. The government has identified another place wherein the government is planning to build 100 homes, wherein the actual homeless is only 56. They're planning to build as much as they can so that maybe, the more houses can be given for homeless people. Now, as an IEA conclave or other group of architects who were interested in working together in that project suggested that let us not go the same homestead way as Kerala is used to be, 10 cents of land or 5 cents of land, and keep on repeating the same thing without no common space, no common amenities, no space to breathe, to play, to grow together as a matured society. So now, when we present that, again, there are town planning schemes too, political issues too, local issues too. Everybody wants 5 cents. You can't do that. There are political issues, imbalance. Now, fighting with the government and the machinery for such a long years, almost 20 years, we are still surviving. That itself is a big achievement, I would say. Now, day before yesterday, I was in that 2 days, continuously I was in Wayanad for this particular debate discussions. And that's why I missed today's conference because I had a major, fever and whatever. That is not the point. The point is, now they have convinced us, or rather they are agreed on the point that the political system as well as the stakeholders, the final homemakers, they want 6 cents of land, individual homes, and the entire land is kind of over. So we were, trying to convince the fact that, okay, let us at least go ground plus one and leave at least a lot of space for future development, open spaces, so much more community activities, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen because of the lot of limitations, all kind of limitations. Now, these are the two questions, or are the two plight of our society, which I want to really share it with you, and I really request you to give us some opening. Go this way, catch this person, sit with this fellow, and let's do it together. I'm not criticizing anything at all.
Yeah, being
For
retired.
taking such a long time.
Yeah, being a retired bureaucrat, I have the freedom to tell everything. Okay. Your first question or first clarification was about the amendment of building rule, recently amended building rule. I take your mind to earlier amendment. There were another amendment. This is a revised building rule. There were some amendments. That also was not in consultation with all responsible persons. See, everything happens in the ambit of politics. So the persons involved in this process are in some or other way related to political and higher bureaucrats. And some groups are preparing this. Some people does not want to show or expose this to some persons, somebody. Even in our department, some of the people are only aware of this. They were discussing, they were keeping everything in a very secret manner. If anything goes out, that will go to you people, and people may come. In another case, there were instance some engineers' body was involved in the preparation of amendment itself. I am not taking you, some other body. They prepared the draft amendment, they submitted to the government, government looked into and made some amendment, they published it. That is the thing happening in our state. So, as you requested, the vista is there. You can approach the government only. For that, you have to use the political side first. And also in our department, there are some secretaries, they think they are among politicians, among everybody. I will tell you one example, because there are so many planners here. Master plans are prepared mainly for controlling as a development tool. And main regulations are coming through this. So there are zoning regulations. One higher official is telling that everywhere should be mixed zoning. What is the concept? Then what is the purpose of planning preparation? He tells, no. He discusses with the officers and politicians, and he accepts his request to make everywhere mixed zoning so that we can prepare or we can build any building anywhere. That is they want. Then what is the purpose of preparation of a master plan? We cannot control. As the conclave discusses about where to build, how to build, where not to build. That is to be addressed in this master plan only. So these things are related to the highly powered officials and politicians. If you want any more support, I can give you. As I said, I am a retired officer. I have the route, and I know who the people are preparing this, who are looking into the amendments. Anyway, received more than 130 amendments or erratum, and some of them are to be looked into. Especially, I think FSI is to be relooked, but Kerala have the most FSI. That is also there. So these TDR techniques are not applicable here because already we have 4 FIR earlier it was now FSI. So that method of development is not cannot be implemented here.
So I think between his response and Sandeep Varmani talking about each of us spending 2 days and turning into more activist critical thinking, working with organizations, I think there isn't an easy answer, but I think definitely what I'm sensing is that there's a lot more engagement that's required. And just to keep the conversation going, and as well as make sure that we kind of address a wider area to make it conclusive. I'm going to try to move on from where we've been going so far, but still take a point on the group housing that Vinod Sirak you were talking about living in communities, and how this tendency to live in individual detached homes as something that all of us as practitioners in different sense and as owners and clients ourselves is this desire to want to have our own 5 cents, 6 cents and individual plots. And I think I'll ask Suhasini to come to probably venture in, because Oroville has a case of where they live in communities. It's very much the part of the way. And if there's anything you'd like to share, or even the project that you showed, if I'm not mistaken, was about living together.
You see, we can't actually bring Oroville into this issue, because the issue that this country is facing is very different. The land of the project of Oroville is held by one organization. There's no individual ownership of lands of the residents of Oroville, so forget about it. Katie touched upon this, and Sandeep also, the issue of land. We're not talking about it. We're talking about the administration, the urban local bodies, and all these things. But there is a huge impact of how we develop based on the land ownership. There's development regulations, there's building bylaws, there's a whole system of plan making. Like in urban areas, it's with the area sabha, the ward committee, the elected representatives, then the nominated representatives. They're all there. There is a gap of decision making and the people's participation. So this gap, there are different players who fall outside the influence zone, either of the elected politicians or the nominated, which is the IAS, and the citizens groups. These agencies can vary from simple landowners to lobbies that control the development of land, to people who are actually influencing the credit institutions in terms of putting money in on where the development happens. To give you an example, when the Mr. Kejriwal, before he became the Chief Minister of Delhi, he was with his NGO Parivartan, if you remember. He made an RTI against the privatization of water in Delhi. I don't know if anybody is aware of it. Basically, the Delhi government was handing over the water supply to a private company, and the credit institution, the World Bank, which was giving in the money, was forcing the government to select a certain agency as the implementing agency, which will then have the money, collect the money, and get out of the country, which is Price Waterhouse, I think, there. What happened in the end? It's only because of citizens' participation which was drummed up, where, people of Delhi who get water connections were not the ones who were going to be affected. But a major part of people who live in what we call the Juggi Jhoparis and unauthorized settlements and the resettlement colonies and others who don't have legal water connections would then be outside the domain of water supply, which a city is obliged to provide to a citizen. Now, when the private sector comes in, the government has stepped back from its role. It's no longer responsible. At one point, Mr. Kejriwal even asked, is this country independent? Because when it went into the RTI and it went into the courts, and then it started to come out, what was the arrangement between the government, the World Bank, Price Waterhouse, and Delhi Development Authority, it was very clear neither the Delhi government nor the DDA had any power anymore with the privatization question. So it's very nice when the JNURM and all that, they talked about public-private partnership and all that. This is not partnership. Public-private partnership is not partnership, by the way. It's actually handing over the public to the private, and the partnership is we paying them, and they collect the money in 6-7 years, and they're out of this place. Our problem is, how do we as citizens intervene in this gray area between the nominated, the elected, and all the structure that is in place? And this is where my question comes in, because unfortunately, the education in terms of planning and architecture does not teach us how development happens in this country. It only teaches us how to make drawings. We are not taught about the process of development at all. And we come out very, very naive, and we think that we can go in there. And like Sandeep said, start locally. Start getting involved. I mean, it's not easy, I can tell you, because I intervene. I am never in a popularity competition in Oroville. But somewhere you have to get over your inertia and just start. Take up something, learn about it. Like Katie said, be critical. Pick up a topic, collect information, ask questions, be critical, find answers, and see where it leads to. It takes time, but this kind of informal education is necessary because our formal education is actually trying to marginalize us from being citizens of this country. All tertiary education in this country wants the educated to be marginalized from the governance. Sorry, that's how it is. There's a very clear screening process to make sure that you guys will go and buy your 2 cars, have 1.6 kids, find the right partner, set up an office, and go on with life. And you have to break this inertia. It's so well organized that you don't even know that you're not making your choices. The choices are made for you.
Thank you, Shasni. I think there was a couple of key points, and there's a lot of teachers in the hall, and there's one at an education level what needs to change, but also at an individual level. There's, we were talking about how do we get things done within the system. I think before Praveen has a question, before he asks his question, I just wanted to ask Sandeep that you mentioned about making policies with these communities, and it sounded very simple. As you go there, you spend 2 weeks, and then you're making policies. But then Vinod Sirek is talking about things that are not changing, and he's been 20 years on it. So maybe at one point it'll be nice if you can come back. But first, Praveen, if you can go ahead.
I'm Praveen Ram. I practice architecture. I'm not talking about policy or government. I'm talking in a different plane altogether. I don't know whether this is relevant, but see, the answer lies right here in your bag. It says, greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. So how does it relate to us? I feel that we talk about solar panels, rammed earth walls, mud construction. I feel it is just like we have cancer and you're putting Band-Aid to treat it, and you put solar panels everywhere. You might have to cover the whole globe with solar panels, and the sun won't come in anymore. So really, does it really work? And I feel the main issue here is us not relating to people. Like when the floods happened, it was not the government, it was not the architects, it was the people of Kerala who saved everybody. And why did they do that? And what is the environment here? Is it some scenery we are looking at, a hill or a river? Or what is your immediate experience of environment? It's the people, it's the person next to you. So if you don't feel for that person next to you, and if you won't feel for your neighbor, your client, you're not going to think about anything else. You will just be building buildings, and you'll be only talking about buildings. But whom are we building these structures for? You're building them for people. And that's what's missing in our colleges. We don't talk about people. We just talk about buildings and buildings and buildings. Do you like all buildings through just a dead town and no people in it? Where are the people there? No, why aren't we taking our students to the villages, talking to people, teaching them? Are the teachers even relating to the people there? You know, so there's nothing. There's no human element anywhere. That's why I feel Hunarshala is something which I relate to, because they are talking about people here. They're not architects who are going and teaching them something. They are actually learning from the people, and they're just assisting them with some technical stuff, maybe some drawings. No, but it is the people whom they're talking to and they just allow them, they help them to build. So I feel this whole environment issue will simply go away if we relate to people. And who's the government here? Why are we always blaming the government? Government is a reflection of what the people are. You have elected them, so they are the government. They are sitting there because you are like that. Okay? So don't blame the government. Yes, you can always pressurize them, but policies happen, and yes, there is, I wouldn't call going against something activism, because I don't think we can go against something and be violent and be very, very aggressive about it and get things done. No. We need to change ourselves, we need to change the people around us, we need to have this thing around us, and then slowly everything will fall into place. When people in a society change and they want something, the government automatically will come and agree to it. They have no other choice. They won't get elected otherwise. So I feel it's the other way around. I don't know whether I'm right here, but I just wanted to say this. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any questions, it will be nice if you can just show me your hands because we're running close to our deadline.
I'm Arshad. I'm a practicing architect and doing my master's now. As a part of my thesis, I was doing stormwater management in Calicut town. I came across few things like it's audible. Yeah. So, how many of you are from? I don't know. Most of the people are from Calicut or around. I went to CWRDM, Center for Water Resource Development. So I talked to them like, where is this? Is there any STP in the Calicut town? They were like, we proposed one STP, and it was in 2004, and it's still under construction. And this STP, capacity of the STP is like 21 million water liters per day. And the population of Calicut is like, this 21 million per day means it will support around 1.5 lakhs people. And the population of Calicut is 4,45,000. So, and we don't have an integrated solution for stormwater management or how to mitigate this flood. And while talking about the flood, we heard about the floods like it happens in North India, like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and all. We came to know about the flood last year. And the flood happened to 2018 and 2019. And about the rainfall, June, July, August, that was the major time we have the heavy rainfall. After that, we don't have that much rainfall. After the flood, we have seen that there were drought. And after the flood, the government started making a lot of drainages. We have seen everywhere the roads were broken and they started drainages. But I have a doubt that does anybody have any quantification about how much water we have, how much water, rainwater we collect, and how much water is percolated, how much pervious areas we have. We have proper scientific calculation for that. But we don't have any such things. We give the contract to the contractors, they make drainages, and this wastewater will go to the sea. In Calicut town, most of the water, it's divided into Zone A, Zone B. Zone B goes to the Kanoli Canal and Zone A goes to the Arabian Sea. That's happening in the Calicut town. We guys are not aware about any, nothing, the wastewater we generate, where does it go? Like in the hotels, most of the hospitals in the Calicut town, the wastewater is going to the Kanoli Canal. So somebody talked about the awareness things. The awareness should be from the younger generation, from the kids to the architects, or for every individuals, like every stakeholders in participating in the government, like the political parties, the town planners, everyone should be involved, and we should bring a integrated solution for this stormwater management, or what we call flood mitigation.
Prashant, you raised the issue, and Professor Katie also talked about this thing about data and maps and how they're helpful and useful. Having worked in India and abroad, do you have any ideas, thoughts on how do we make the use of maps more streamlined? How do we take advantage of it? How do we promote it? And because you talked about it being a tool.
So just before I say that, I think of all the disasters, water is the most predictable disaster or element that you can predict actually, because we know water flows by gravity, it always flows downstream. There was a comment made by Robert F. Kennedy many years ago once that in the past water always flows, we know all water flows down, but now we know that the water flows where the money is. And that's what, it was a rhetoric answer, but the fact is that the water flows down always. So, and we also know that there's no land called flat land. Even Bihar is as flat as you can get, but still it is slopes in certain direction, it slopes from Nepal, where the water enters into Kosi River, and by the time it reaches Ganga, the slope is very, very slow. It's like in 13 centimeters in 1 kilometer was the slope. So you can imagine the water coming down at a force, but how it would flow towards the sea, it would flow very, very slow. And that slow flow is what is get obstructed and gets flooded. Anyhow, earthquakes are the most difficult ones to predict. Tsunami is even more difficult because it happens underground and because of earthquake. And so, but water you can still predict. And so we know water flows downstream. So if you really want to know where the flooding is going to happen, is to just look at the maps where it's where it shows the channels, it shows the, I mean, even the village maps. I'm talking about paper maps that were there in the 70s and 60s, Survey of India maps. It has contour lines on it, and it shows where the low-lying areas are. And of course, they're difficult to get, but you can get them in government offices. Today, there is enough digital data to actually have a 30 centimeter resolution water topography data, which was released a few years ago. Before that, in 2004, 90 meter resolution data was released. By resolution, I mean in 30 meters, where 30 meters land piece will have one elevation value, which is quite good for a panchayat area or a district. District area is quite good if you have that. 90 meters is also very good. And that is the data we use pretty much in the tsunami, mapping the coastal area. In fact, the government was not aware that data was released by SRTM, which is released by JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and NASA and Japanese government. They released that data in 2004, and it just happened, we got hold of it within few months, and we used it, and we showed it to the governor's office, and the governor's secretary got really concerned that where did you get this high resolution topography data from for this coastal area, which is considered to be a sensitive, restricted area. Survey of India has several areas that are restricted, which is 50 kilometers from the coast, or whole of Kutch and Bhuj area, whole of Kashmir and whole of Northeast is considered sensitive area as far as high resolution topography data is concerned. So he immediately picked up the phone and called the Home Secretary in Delhi. While he was looking at my laptop and looking at the data, I was showing him all the low-lying areas in Pondicherry, and he couldn't get to the Home Secretary, but he actually said that I need to inform the government that this data has become public. Anyhow, that data eventually now everybody uses it. It's there around everywhere, and you can use that data. And if you have somebody who understands GIS and all, it's very easy to create a 3D model of the surface model of it. And if you want more detail than that, then you have to get surveys done. Nowadays, even drone surveys are possible to extrapolate high resolution data. Even LiDAR data, there are several ways to collect data. But the free data, 90 centimeter resolution, is quite good for any city or urban or a panchayat level area to do at least the basic mapping of the drainage system. And I don't know what data they use in the government here, but the ones that we saw in our district and all, they are pretty archaic. In fact, the railways ones, they're putting a railway alignment close to our Auroville area, and they came with a 1976 Survey of India paper map, and we gave them the digital map, and then they're quite excited about it. They're looking at digital data and all this. So in the railway modernization report by Sam Pitroda, there was a whole rail GIS proposal. There was the previous Planning Commission, Dr. Kasturi Rangan was pushing, when he was a member of Planning Commission, he was pushing for a national GIS bill to be proposed in the parliament, which never happened. But they were actually proposing for a national GIS hub in the Planning Commission, where every department would plug their data, the environment department, the railways, the forest department, lands, and the road departments, and everybody would plug in their data so that other agencies within the government can start using it. Eventually, they wanted to open it up. But I don't think it's been taken forward by this current government, but the previous government was very, I know Dr. Kasturi Rangan, then Dr. Sam Pitroda, they were very keen on they called it democratization of information, and that is what they wanted to make it public. There is still a group in the Ministry of Defense who's very keen on holding on, not releasing the high resolution topography data. Government of India and NASA regularly flies low elevation planes to collect multispectral data, and it's all there in public domain, in the government circles. In very critical cases, other departments get used to it. When will we get to use it, we don't know. But whatever is available is still very good right now. So you can do good analysis with all this data that is available in public domain. And then there's OpenStreetMaps, then there are satellite imageries from Google Earth, which uses digital globe. Those imageries are quite good. So data is there. If you really want to look around, and if somebody here is keen on looking at your area, I'm happy to help out with that data.
Sandeep, can you get back to us on in making policy change on one side? On the other side, also a bit on how you operate, because you have like 4 or 5 NGOs and there's a lot of work that you're doing. So if somebody in the crowd wanted to take this up more seriously, the very straightforward practicalities of making a living as well, because one thing that Vinod Surik mentioned.
Can I add that to his question for you? This is a question for me. Could you explain them the Abhiyan model? I think that was a very good model where all the NGOs got together as a consortium of NGOs, and how different people with different expertise, and also how we worked in Bihar with people from livelihood, sanitation, Shala with building, and Bala with planning, and we with regional planning, how we work together. I think it might be helpful to explain that model, that how different NGOs can come together and form consortium and what they can do.
No, very short, but one reason why I was excited about coming for this workshop was because you said there are going to be people from very different fields coming together. And that's the strength of any action that is required. Otherwise, what is happening is that the converted meet all the time, and they are just releasing a lot of angst. And it doesn't serve any purpose. What we try to do is that we engage with very different people. Somebody who's a trader, somebody who's a sabji wala, somebody who's a doctor, somebody who's... And that ward, every ward has that. And if you are able to engage with everybody as human beings, not as professionals, we always... And the other is, if you decide that, okay, I don't have an answer. I remember my best teacher used to be one who used to come completely unprepared to the class and say, okay, let's discuss something that I also don't know. And then we used to do amazing work together. But unfortunately, we as professionals are always under the pressure that we have to know. And therefore, we are afraid of actually going out and sitting down with people who might be able to, you might have a bad meeting, that's fine. Let's not be afraid of it. So when we go out and start sitting down with communities or in our own ward and seem absolutely ignorant and naive, you'll be surprised how much people are willing to talk to you and engage with you, just at a human level. We have to get over this fear of just engaging. Just go onto the street and start talking to somebody. India is one place you can do that very easily. And he'll tell you his life story and all his problems. And very often just listening is a solution. In this country, a lot of people just don't get an opportunity to vent. And solutions emerge when you are willing to walk into spaces of where you are feeling insecure. And you have to keep doing whatever is in front of you. You can't start trying to do something that is not in your control. So sometimes out of 10 things, one thing becomes a reality, 9 just become good relationships. And 9 is also very nice, as long as you're not having so much of expectations out of yourself. The world will take care of itself. And you'll be surprised how well it is able to do that. But in any case, you have no control over it. So just do what you can do. Sorry, I'm not getting into the whole Abhiyan model and all that. I think there are a lot of people who would... I'd like to listen to a lot of the young people who have come.
We're running short of time, so further from now, it would be nice if everybody could quickly, if you have any questions, we'll accumulate questions and then get the panelists to respond to.
Hello, I'm Pratik. I'm doing my master's in environmental engineering in Pondicherry University. So, this is my hometown, so that's why. So, since we are discussing about sustainable development in Kerala, since there was flood here and what I saw was just water everywhere and it just drained to the sea. So first thing what we should address is the water system, the channels, which should be properly channeled, and water should be taken to a reservoir or a store place where it could be saved for next coming months, because we had a comment that drought is also hitting Kerala. And next, since architects are more in count here, architecture is not just about building. You can link architecture with psychology, you can link architecture with any field where you can design anything you want. Don't just limit yourself to drawing. That is the main reason I didn't pick architecture, because I'm very bad at drawing. And in the side of policy, government changes can be expected, but it's not what we can expect in a short time of span. But if we do a change, that can happen in a very short time. For example, we can take care of the design and the material to be used. Design factor, as a speaker spoke, they were talking about cutting short the material usage, and another point is land usage, we should use only 50%. While designing, just keep it in mind, 50 or below that, you use the land for construction. And materials, as they have discussed in their slides, you can use alternate materials also. And other few points, keywords which I want you to keep in mind is, there is a method of afforestation, Miyawaki method, that is the best and only method for afforestation currently found. Just take a note of Miyawaki method, examine it, just read it. And then, as ma'am told, the heat island effect, that is also a major factor which is increasing the heat around us. So that can be influenced with change in the design and the material. And then I had, next it was about the mentality of us. Like, we have people here, they talk about the political side, and then it goes to the way how to plan it. But then the mindset of us is the main factor which we should consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more reminder, we've got like 5, 6, maybe maximum 8 minutes, so we'll, quick, anybody, last set of questions. There was a hand there. Anywhere else? Anywhere else? Okay, 3. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. It'd be nice if we can keep them short, and we'll try to get one round of... Sorry? Yes, it'll... There you go.
Hi everyone, I'm Gopika Krishna Kumar. I'm doing my master's in sustainable architecture from MES College currently. My first question is to Katie sir. You were talking about no organizations like for pre-construction land management is actually being done. So is there anything, can you elaborate on that? That is my first question. And second thing is, I'm doing a study on the wetlands, urban wetlands in Kerala, because in India, we have Vembanad Lake as the largest wetland, and we have a diminution of wetland. That is from 1961 to 2019, we have been having a diminishing of wetland due to various reasons like tourism, encroachment of lands like the paddy fields, etc. The Murad flat issues, that was the current issue that we faced. So all these issues are a major, thing that we are facing currently. So what can be done about that? As in, is there any, what are the loopholes? What, governmental policies are there, like to conserve wetlands, but what can be done about that? What are the loopholes? Who is allowing them to construct on a wetland? That is my question.
Okay, so there's 2 questions there.
It's not just, I'm just asking everyone. It's just...
Kevin, there's a question over there right next. Can you pass them?
Myself, Shahanaz from Calicut, and doing my master's second year. So my question is There's a suggestion like to construct, take the land as a minimal usage for constructing and use different material as a sustainable material and all. But the clients, those who come to us, like how can we convince them to use such materials? Like they may come with a residence like as a dream home. They want to make it as a very big home or like it should be better than others. So like how can we convince them to make a small house or a sustainable residence? So how can we move forward? And I am a sustainable architecture student. So I'm thinking like how can I move forward with my sustainable aspects after my graduation?
Thank you. Kevin?
My name is Kevin. I'm a practicing architect. My question is, again, with relation to what Gopika said about the case of the murdered apartments. How do we, or who do we trust, basically? I'm talking from the point of homeowners. We believe in a government, or we actually, so when a homeowner goes on to build something, he either puts his trust in the developers or the realtors, and then the government. And now, one fine day, the government comes and says they have to take it down. So in the first part of the program, it said where to build and where not to build. I'm asking another question: what to take down, what not to take down in terms of prevention of environmental damage or future environmental damage? Who do we trust over here? And is this a right step to take? Saying that this will prevent further environmental damages down the road? I'm asking, is it fine rendering 350 families homeless, in this case of mud flat? Is it actually a good thing that the government has done?
Thank you. Any other? There was a question there in the front. I guess after this, the speakers can do one round of wrapping up before we close.
Hi, my name is Nayan. I'm third year architecture student. This is not a question, just commenting on comments. There was a talk on the awareness to be given to the people or the or the youth or the people in front of us, the awareness. I thought like what kind of awareness should be given to the people, and it should be not just thought just now, like the educational system should be made in such a way that the students from the school itself should be aware of the problems or the things which happen around them. So mainly on the educational system. And the other thing which I like to share is what is a living space for a people? Living for the questioning the idea of living for a person. So I don't think it should be, especially in Kerala, where the people are more attached to the ground. I don't think it need not to be in future. It's to be continued that the people should be more attached to the ground in living. They could also live like a colony. People where the economic status of the people is not considered, and which help them to reduce the boundaries between people, and also moving upwards, like vertical inhabited of people, which help them in reducing the ground, and which can also encourage in using the ground in good ways. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Prashant, because you had a question answer, we'll do Prashant, Sandeep, Mohan Rao, Suhasini, and then Katie, if you can end 2 minutes each, answering any of the questions that came up, and then closing remarks.
I had an answer for the wetland part that she asked. It was a couple of years ago, Space Application Center in Ahmedabad, which is one of the ISRO's department. They did a atlas of wetland in India. And it was quite a detailed atlas. The PDF of that is available for download. You can find it on the web. And in that, it's a all the wetlands of India, and plus they actually went state by state and they have detailed maps at state level. So you can find the Kerala section in that. That has quite detailed data on that, and that will tell you. Our understanding about the wetland is fairly new, although we now are understanding the importance of wetland. It's a sponge, it holds the water that eventually seeps into the ground, and it doesn't flood everywhere. Anywhere, wherever you see the wetlands being destroyed, flooding has happened over there, because excess water that the wetland used to hold, it's a wetland, actually basically it's a transition zone between a water body and a land, dry land. So it's a transition zone. You see most of the lakes in India, in the southern part of India, which are seasonal, you'll see that if you look at the satellite imagery at different times, you'll see that in rainy season it's very full, but by the end of the summer it's fairly dry. Sometimes it goes down to bone dry, sometimes it goes down to 10%, sometimes it's 20%, depending on how much rain it has got. So rest of that area, that's when people start coming in and start putting paddy fields, or somebody starts building a hut over there, and then when actually the water level rises, when the rainy season comes, and one of the reasons for a season, let's say there's a much more heavier rain, then the water really goes out, and sometimes it overflows and goes beyond that. So that's the vulnerability. I remember having this discussion with the collector of our area, Viluppuram, once, and we're telling him that wetlands are important. They were actually originally, for many years, were classified as wasteland, and that's what wasteland is always available to build, so let's fill it up and build. That was the idea, that if it's low-lying, so what? Let's raise the level and build it up. We had that, Sandeep will remember that we had the long discussions about tsunamis. A lot of these tsunami rehabilitation sites were actually being raised, and then houses were being built on that. And there were one person, we had an argument with an architect where he said that, I made the community safe, the rehabilitation people safe. But what you are actually not looking at is a larger regional drainage pattern, which you may be making your community safe, but some other community which was not affected by water will now get affected, because excess water has to go somewhere. So if you are raising a water and filling up a wetland, that excess water has to go somewhere. So it will go somewhere. It will find its way, which will be mostly downstream. So the Viluppuram collector told us that my office, the district collectorate, was built on a lake bed, because they couldn't find any land near the thing. So there was an abandoned lake, which was all the inlets were blocked. So they actually filled up the lake and actually built a collectorate office on that. Luckily, it never got flooded, so he never knew about it, but he went and he told us about this. My father-in-law told me that the main bus stand in Nagarkoil was actually a lake bed. So people used to say, I'm going to the lake. Actually, they meant I'm going to the bus stand. So this is how we were treating lake beds. But now we have more knowledge, we have more understanding about water bodies and lakes. So now governments are not doing this. Tsunami time, there was a government order that they were going to release, was that if there is no land available for rehabilitation, let's use the Parambuk land, which is the common village land. And a lot of these common village lands are reserved for the drainage channels or lake beds and all those things. So we managed to not get that through. So we had to engage with the government saying that, no, this is not, please don't allow this, because the rehabilitation sites will get flooded. So luckily we had some influence on the government at that time, so it worked. So wetland is something that people are still understanding the importance of it. So.
Quick closing remarks, or do you want to move on?
Yeah, so I would come back to my original comment that you have to engage. Sandeep says engage with people. I say also engage with the government. Be in the collector's face every few weeks and tell him that this is what we're doing. In fact, take some summary of our slides and discussion over here, present him a summary, give him a report, have a 20-minute session with him, because I don't think you'll get more than 20 minutes in the first go. Or have a session with them and slowly engage with them. Let him know that you are here and you are trying to do something. If he comes across a problem, he might come back to you with something. But continue to engage with them at a district administration level. So.
Thank you. Suhasini?
Commercial potential means whether if you built a mall here, will it sell? If I built 30% commercial and 70% housing, is that good, or should I reverse the percentage? This is the kind of advice that those people give. They don't tell the developers, or developers don't even ask that question of what is it suitable for. So pre-construction land management is a very major part. Suppose you know that there are bedrock formations under something, or you know that it was part of Prashant was just pointing out, is part of a lake at one time. And it's now atrophied and looks like a flat open land. In fact, whenever you see flat open land without any trees on it, suspect that it was a lake, always. Yeah? So, or know that it was a lake. And that's unsuitable for construction, both also in terms of the bearing capacity of the soil, as well as in terms of the environmental impact that development would have. So there are many different sides of dimensions to understanding land. Part of it we teach in the urban design program. So those who want to know more about all this can join urban design. Because it is, I'm not saying it because I taught that for a long time, because I actually genuinely believe that the world of architecture is actually confined. It's a confined world, confined to the plot and, like one's own ego or the client's requirements and so on and so forth. There's nothing, there's no environment, there's no life outside it. But urban design will open your eyes to see, look at land, look at political issues, look at economics, look at larger issues of people and how social networks function in places. All that is part of the education in urban design. Yeah? So I would urge those of you who are interested in furthering this thing to join any course in urban design, because it's certainly an improvement on what you would have already known as an architect. And land management is one of the things, the profiling of the land, etc., is one of the things that we very seriously do in urban design, even as a studio. There's an independent studio, apart from the design studio, which looks at only site planning as an issue. Studying contours and looking at suitabilities and road networks and so on and so forth, how to lay it on a parcel of land. It's a very important skill for any serious architect. And unfortunately, that's not given in our undergrad programs, and that is developed in urban design normally as a very serious component of the education. So I would suggest that more people go and join urban design, and you will get a larger exposure on how things actually function within the act of making the city. We are in the business of making the city. So I don't have anything more to add. I think all other questions have been answered. Questions about wetland was partly answered, I guess. Part of the answer is that, at least in Kerala, there are actually land use regulations. You cannot use a wetland for paddy fields. You can't use paddy fields for housing, if you go by the normal law. There is a law protecting land uses as they are, designed basically to protect the environment, because even the uses that we indulge in are result of a certain land system or quality of the environment. If you see paddy field, you will know that there is a place where there is a larger drainage happening, and that's a basin which collects water, because water is essential for paddy. So there are these systems in the land network which are protected by the land use law, and you cannot turn places where you are growing prawns. You can't make that into a paddy field, or you can't make a paddy field into a kind of cash crop. You will have to grow the same thing. But these laws are subverted progressively by the government regulations, planning regulations, and special permissions which are given by ministers to change those uses, which is why we have had the kind of devastation that we have had. The flood is not caused by that, but the number of deaths and devastation and loss of property is caused by that action, by invasion of the wetlands and invasion of the low-lying areas and the riverbeds by development. There were laws against all this. There are laws against all this. But they are progressively subverted because of the vested interests of developers and how, in coalition with the authorities, either at local planning level or at the central or the state government level, there is a collaboration between these people, and that's how all these lands have been invaded. So basically, they are responsible for that. Wetlands are protected all across the country. You're not supposed to build on wetlands. The entire new part of Calcutta was built on a wetland without any environmental clearance. So there are lots of violations going on in this country, and Kerala has been a victim of that violation, especially because a lot of money that's not made out of our own resources, the resources, not the resources that came out from this land, money was made somewhere else in the Gulf, and then it's brought and spent here. Then you get an invasive relationship with the land, because you're not sourcing your resources from your own land. Your resources are coming from somewhere, so it's very easy to go and throw it on the land. So that's what has happened largely in Kerala because of violation of existing rules. So I think the recent example of the CRZ violation is also the same case. I don't want to get into a discussion on it. I know it's a very emotional issue for many people. But let's face facts. There are laws, and there's somebody who signed for the many people, a whole chain of people, starting from the state government to the local panchayat, who signed on papers to allow it. Where are those people? Now, it's not that the buyers were all innocent. They also knew there were some problems. But they went ahead and took the risk. And there were middlemen who took the risk. They guaranteed the buyers. So now all of them should be in the dock. It's not just a question of, there was a question earlier raised whether should the building be raised or it should not be raised. In my view, it should be raised. And I think all such places should be identified and raised. There is no other way we are going to learn. Otherwise, climate change will come and teach them a good lesson. And at that time, don't give them any public money's help. Don't give them any assistance. Let those places drown. They'll go underwater for sure, because they are violated the CRZ zone, and that zone itself is in the danger of being sunk now with the new global warming that's going to happen. So there are some very tough questions to be asked, and it only has tough answers because we have been far too complacent in the way we exploited nature without thinking about its consequences. And that's not only done by people, it's done by, I think, almost everyone involved, including us architects are been collaborators with that process. I don't know whether I should go on anymore or... Thank you. I don't have anything more to say. Thank you for calling me here. It was a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for pitching in with your thoughts, your questions, your comments, and to the vice speakers, obviously. I think there was engage, but I think the point that stood out the most is the need to engage and the need to be much more participative, critical, to be much more inquiring of what the facts are, what the data says, what the legal frameworks allow, and to then respond. And I think Sandeep Virmani's point about all of us spending some time putting 2 days, 3 days, or a few days a month on these kind of issues is, I think, one simple thing that we can all do, whether it's within cohort or on your own individual ways. I'd like to conclude by thanking everybody for being part of this discussion, and I hand over back to the announcers. Thank you.